Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi, and wow, what a heavy day. It's really all I can say. Watching Lori is one thing, but then we'll get to it. So I just want to open up by saying a big thank you to a few people. Eunice, for your donation. Also, Mama B3 is somebody that came up to me in the courtroom. I was downstairs for openings, and then after openings, I got to go upstairs and sit in. Mama B made me these gorgeous sapphire earrings. Tylee and I both share the same birthstone. We're both September babies. And she thanked me for including Tylee and some things she liked and some of the little facts I've gathered about her as a person just over the course of the podcast, and felt like she wanted to make me these. And I am just blown away, y'all. Thank you so much, Mama B. That meant so much to me, more than you know. Also, big thank you to Teresa, Brooke, Miss Janaz, Diane, Carrie, Amy, Dustin, Laney, Ronnie, LAX2, NRT, All I Think About, and Michelle for your donations. Real quick music fact of the day. This song is very appropriate for openings in this trial. Dirty Deeds, Done Dirt Cheap by AC/DC. The inspiration came from Angus Young's favorite cartoon as a kid called Beanie and Cecil. The main character, Dishonest John, carried a business card that said Dirty Deeds, Done Dirt Cheap, holidays, Sundays, and special rates. All right, so let's jump in. I'm just going to give you some observations first of just things that I saw. Number one, she's not wearing a blazer. It's more like just a longer, just like a little sweaterish thing with a white shirt. She's wearing black pants and what kind of looks like boots. They almost look like combat boots to me. And then she has kind of like a bungee style ankle restraint on. It's not on the floor, but if she were to take off running, I mean, it would be fun to watch, but clearly that keeps her from doing that. She seems to be focused on the witnesses. She does not hesitate from where I was sitting to make eye contact. I'm going to tell you right now, Kay Woodcock gave it right back to her, stared her down a couple of times. One time when they were at sidebar, when Kay was on the stand, Lori's at the table by herself, a little awkward, because she ain't got nobody to giggle with. And Kay was just on that stand, just looking at her, not in a mean, menacing way, but just making eye contact. So that dynamic was interesting because I think Lori may have looked, but then she kind of looks over when they're at sidebar. She looks a little older in person to me. I'm not trying to be petty, but I know this is stuff you guys want to hear about. The back of her hair does not look that great, y'all. All the curls go in the front. The back, it needs a little work. But overall, as far as emotion, I really didn't see much. To be honest, there were times where they showed her certain documents relating to the kids, a big picture of Tylee on the screen. Of course, I can see a profile of her. Of course, she does turn and talk to Mr. Thomas a lot. But when she's forward facing, I can't see any emotion. But I didn't see any emotion that lasted longer than half a second. We thought that Zulema was there. A reporter said, I saw Zulema in the bathroom. I do not think that was her. She's clearly not ready to testify yet. And I don't think she would just be here observing. I could have missed her, but I do not think that was Zulema. That was something that I did tweet out. And we, down in the media room, overflow room, you do see the same exhibits as in the courtroom. So he explains the schedule to everybody, 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 every day, 15-minute mid-morning break, less than an hour for lunch, and then that same 15-minute afternoon break. We did break before 3:30 today after Brandon Boudreau finished up on the stand. So it's nice. In Murdoch, we could go past 6 sometimes. So it's good to have an early stop time so I can do this. Later tonight, I will be on Dan Abrams Live, and then following that, Banfield. So tune in. We're going to talk about today. The indictment was read by the court as well as her plea of not guilty. As they named JJ and Tylee, she didn't show any emotion. She had her head turned, kind of like looking behind Archibald's back. And I wasn't sure what she was looking at, but it's kind of like the door area. I'm not sure what she was staring at over that way. It could have been somebody from the court. This was when I was downstairs. They showed the crime scene photos in the openings. Not super graphic, but they did show some. I missed Tylee's. I was typing, but they showed how they found JJ in the ground, as well as the duct tape on his hands. It had been separated at that point, I believe, from what I could see. And you see duct tape, just a massive amount of duct tape around his little hand. Then they showed Tammy Daybell on the autopsy table after she had been exhumed. She was dressed in all white. She looked very peaceful, but they kept that up a long time. They kept her picture up most of the opening statements. They kind of went through JJ's pictures quickly. I just want to tell you guys, Kay and Larry are doing great. They are strong crushes there. Annie Cushing and her beautiful daughter are here. I got to meet them. It seems like everybody's ready for this. It's been so many years and it's here and it's not going to be pleasant. But I can tell you for today, Kay Woodcock on that stand, solid as a rock. And Brandon the same way, more emotional. He's a very emotional, soft-spoken guy. But Kay and Larry and the whole family as a whole, Charles's brother is here with his wife. Everybody was very strong, and I was so proud of them. They're good people, and all of those family members have been dealt an unimaginable hand to deal with for the rest of their life, and they were very resolved today. So I just wanted to let you guys know all the family seems to be doing well externally, internally, probably another story. So Lindsay Blake delivered the openings for the state. She said money, power, and sex. That's what this is all about. Lori used these things to get what she wanted. She wanted money, power, and sex. It didn't matter what obstacles she had to move, a person or a thing. It was a person. It didn't matter who. Tylee was vibrant. She had lost her father. Tylee had money and Lori wanted it. Joshua Jackson Vallow, he was a vibrant 7-year-old. He took time, energy, and effort to care for. And that took Lori away from what she wanted to do. When JJ lost his father, he became more difficult to care for. JJ also was entitled to Social Security benefits. Tammy Daybell, a mom to 5, a grandmother, a computer whiz who was married to Chad. Lori wanted Chad. Tammy had a life insurance policy. Tylee was last seen September 8th. The next time Tylee was seen was on June 9th, 2020 in a shallow grave on Chad's property. What was left of Tylee? Charred remains. You will hear it described as a mass of bone and tissue. Yeah, trigger warning. I'm sorry, a little late, but this does deal with very graphic things. You will hear it described as a mass of bone and tissue. The defendant's daughter. Her DNA discovered on a pickaxe and a shovel on Chad's property. That is new. We knew they were testing some tools. Now we know they found her DNA on a pickaxe and a shovel. I've always theorized Tylee was dismembered in that barn or on that property somewhere because if it was in that townhome, they would have found biological evidence for sure. JJ was last seen with Alex Cox. He was sleeping on Alex's shoulder. He was not seen again until June 9th, 2020 in a shallow grave on Chad's property, wrapped in garbage bags and taped around his head and arms. They show the crime scene photos at this point. October 19th, Chad was home with Tammy and a 911 call is placed. Tammy is dead. She's cold and stiff. Chad moved her body. That's when they show her picture. Initially, it was not deemed as suspicious, but 17 days later, Lori and Chad got married in Hawaii. Lori switched Tylee's money from Tylee's bank on August 16th to her bank account. She collected benefits for them until her arrest. You're going to hear so many dates and events, but this case starts October 2018 when Lori met Chad for the first time. She was a fan of his. She traveled with Melanie Gibb and Zulema to Utah for a conference. The very first meeting, they shared beliefs that they had been married before in prior probations. They designated themselves as James and Elena. Y'all, that comes back in the Loingfire story. Just reminding y'all that exists, if you forgot. He wrote a story for her that mirrored the events in their lives. Their spouses were alive and well when they first met. She wanted Chad for herself, and the relationship moved quickly. Chad traveled to Arizona to be at meetings, including one at Lori's house. Lori told others with Chad's help, she could rate people as light or dark and would explain the evil entity would push the person out. And to get rid of the spirit was through casting, prayer, and energy work. The body had to be destroyed to release the spirit. You'll hear how Alex and Lori were close and he would do anything for Lori. When she uprooted her life in Arizona and went to Idaho, he quit his job and came with her. His job, according to Chad and Lori, was to protect Lori. If Chad and Lori asked Alex to do something, he did it. You will hear how Lori was convincing people that JJ was a zombie, and they believed her. She told a friend, April Raymond, that's her friend in Hawaii, by the way, when she got divorced, that JJ would live with Charles. And Lori was telling people she was on a religious mission to gather the 144,000. She told people what she did on earth no longer counted for her, and she was a translated being, and told others they were in the translation process. They manipulated people not to question their actions. If their actions didn't line up with their teachings all the time, the beliefs changed over time to accommodate that. When Alex was setting the Wi-Fi password, he said to her, "There's too many kids." And Lori said, "Funny." Lori went from Arizona to visit Melaniece. Zulema came over and Lori led a casting on Tammy. And the same day, Tammy came home and was shot at, as we know by Alex Cox. Tammy heard a couple of pops and that man ran off. A call was overheard on October 9th with Lori and someone else. Lori said, quote, "He can't do anything right," end quote. Also, that same night, Lori and Chad talked. Lori went from Arizona to Missouri with Melaniece. They met up with Audrey. We talked about her in the crash course. In Missouri, Lori did another casting on Tammy to cast the evil spirit Viola out. After Missouri, Lori, Melaniece, and Audrey went to Hawaii. Lori was there when Tammy was killed. The kids weren't with her, yet she was spending their money and sending her son Colby money with Tylee's phone. While in Hawaii, Lori and Chad were in constant contact. After returning to Idaho, she inserted herself in Chad's life as if Tammy never existed. She came to Chad's house and met their kids. He introduced people to Lori. Lori and Chad couldn't keep their hands off each other. They talk about getting married. Chad said Lori had a young daughter that recently died, and there was no mention of JJ during this conversation. November 5th, Lori and Chad marry in Hawaii, but Lori began looking for rings in May of 2020 with both spouses still alive and well. And you will hear how malachite rings were being searched for in May. Chad, he upped Tammy's life insurance and was looking for a rental property in Hawaii. The application said, "No minor children." November 26, 2019, investigators arrive at the townhomes looking for JJ. At this point, Tylee was not known to be missing. They made contact with Chad and Alex, and later that day made contact with Lori. Lori said JJ was with Melanie Gibb in Arizona, and Lori told Melanie that JJ was with Kay Woodcock. We know she lives in Louisiana, but Kay called in the welfare check. They cleared the apartments that night. As we know, they scattered. Everybody went their separate ways, and the search began for JJ and Tylee. Lori talked to Melanie Gibb, where Chad asked her not to talk to law enforcement. Lori said, "Just take photos of random kids to send to cops." December 8th, Melanie Gibb calls Lori and Chad and records the call. Melanie Gibb calls out Lori on lying to cops about JJ being with her. Lori refuses to say where JJ was, except he was happy and she knew exactly where JJ was. If someone is dark and castings don't work, the body has to be destroyed. They did what they had to do with any obstacle in their way to get what they want. She also confirms what Chad's children said on that interview they did a year and a half ago. Tammy died of asphyxiation. At the time of Tammy being exhumed, Alex said, "I hope I'm not their fall guy." We may never know what he meant or knew, because the day after Tammy was exhumed, he died. They know the location of Chad and Alex's phone on October 9th with the attempt on Tammy Daybell. Alex's phone had been in the area riding by that very day. We know the day after Tylee is seen, Alex's phone is on Chad's property. Also, something new we learned today, Chad's phone was pinged near the location where Tylee's body was found the day after she was last seen. She speaks of circumstantial evidence. Lindsay Blake is going back through the charges. She said conspiracy is a meeting of the minds to commit a crime, and just one person has to actually commit that crime in the furtherance of a conspiracy. Tylee, she said, was charred remains. Her hands were missing. JJ's hands bound in duct tape. They show that photo of the tape, and it is a ball. You can tell at this point, I think they had separated that ball of duct tape, but it was an excessive amount. It was hard to watch, y'all. It was hard. It makes it so real. It's like, who cares about Lori? Who cares about her shenanigans? Who cares about all this Lori stuff? When you see those photos of JJ's hand and his arm and those red PJs that you've seen the picture of, it makes it so real. I have cold chills right now because JJ and Tylee and Tammy and Charles have always been very, very real to me in Fruit Loop when we started this podcast. But man, they became so much more real today. And what was done to them became so clear looking at these photos. It just is terrible what these people did. So she asked the jury to be attentive and also to apply common sense. So defense attorney says that 1% of cases go to trial. He's here to be sure that Lori's constitutional rights are upheld. And he introduces, Mr. Archibald, by the way, introduces co-counsel John Thomas. This case is about Lori from our perspective. She's one of 6 kids. Her parents are alive. She has an older sister and a brother who died. She believes she will see her family and her children again. She is a beautician. I think he said retired. Mom of 3, stepmom of 2, and a grandmother. People were attracted to her pretty smile, fun-loving, happy-go-lucky demeanor. Her oldest son is Colby, who was born in 1996. And he has 2 children, making Lori a grandma. Tylee was born in 2002, a ray of sunshine. Tylee had pancreatitis, debilitating, but she managed. Lori's marriage to Joe ended badly. Charles Vallow had 2 kids, Lori had 2 kids, and the blended family lasted over a decade. She was such a good mother that Charles's sister Kay asked Lori and Charles to adopt JJ in 2014. Lori was a beautiful wife to Charles. She was kind and a loving mother to her kids, and they adopt JJ. She got interested in end times and religion, and once Lori and her friends met Chad Daybell, her beliefs began to morph and change, and that's where you come into this story. What happened? How did these kids die? Who was involved? Where, when, and why did it happen? The allegations have been read to you, and he reads part of them again. He says it's important to see what Lori's charged with. He reminds the jury that they are here for Lori and not Alex and not Chad. Did she conspire to murder? Did she do the murder? Did she act in furtherance of it? That's the challenge for you. You will have to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. That is our law. Here is the alibi filed. Lori was in her own apartment when JJ and Tylee died in the apartment of Alex Cox. Lori was with Melanie Gibb, David Warwick, and or Chad Daybell. She was in Hawaii when Tammy died. So we know that Melanie Gibb, Melaniece, I believe David Warwick are all coming on for the state to dispute this alibi. All right, so first on the stand, Miss Kay Woodcock, grandmother extraordinaire to JJ, and she explains that her son is JJ's biological father, and her son and his girlfriend could not care for JJ because they struggled with addiction issues. JJ was born addicted to drugs, and he was in NICU for quite a while. So Kay and Larry were given the status of caregivers legally for JJ and took him home when he was released from the hospital in July of 2012. If you go back, I need to post all these, but the interview I did with Kay and Larry last week, they talk about, or the week before, they talk about these very precious moments at home where JJ was fussy. Kay had given him a bath and he wasn't happy. And Larry said, give me the baby, and put him just inside his little robe, chest to chest, skin to skin. And JJ just fell asleep. And he talked about smelling him, smelling his breath, smelling his hair. You see that bond right there. So Charles and Lori got JJ in February of 2013. At this point, they have Kay point Lori out for the record, and she looks dead at her and points her out. Kay did not hesitate to lock eyes with her. Charles and Lori got legal custody of JJ. And she said Charles and Lori actually approached them about adopting JJ. They had the option to adopt JJ, Kay and Larry did, but Charles and Lori offered, and they thought about it. Charles and Lori wanted children of their own, and they each had 2 from previous marriages. They had a much different lifestyle than Kay and Larry did. She said, we worked. They owned their own business. It was 24/7. She said they were family oriented. Lori and Charles were family oriented, active in the church, and Lori was a good mom. After the adoption, we know JJ moved from Louisiana to Maricopa County, Arizona. They changed his name from Canaan to Joshua Jackson Vallow. They maintained that grandparent relationship and saw him on average about every 3 months when they all lived in Arizona and Kay and Larry still were in Louisiana. Eventually, we know Lori and Charles moved to Princeville, Hawaii. They kept in contact with JJ, and Kay would go see him in Hawaii about every 6 months. And when JJ learned to FaceTime or use the phone, it was nonstop. He called all the time. We've heard from one of Charles's sons and from Kay and Larry, he would call 10, 15 times a day. The relationship with Charles and Lori was good. She said Lori was a doll. Kay and Lori, she said, we were good friends, and she met Lori's family over the years. So New Year's 2016, Charles, Lori, JJ, and Tylee moved back to the mainland in Arizona, and so that visitation increased as they were closer. She said Tylee was around during the visits, but sometimes she would often go to her grandparents when Kay and Larry would come into town. Kay really doesn't know why, but they spent a lot of time with her over the years at holidays, birthdays. Kay said Lori was a very doting mom and very engaged. Lori had a photo album with the grandparents' pictures in it and other people, and she said that Lori was very good at pointing out mama, papa, pointing out who these people were that he didn't get to see every day to keep them fresh in his mind. And she said from everything she could see, Lori was a good mom, and Charles was very hands-on. He traveled for work, but when he was home, he was with JJ all the time. So in 2019, Kay saw JJ in Arizona in February. This is back when everything had started. Lori was going to leave Charles, and she stayed there 2 weeks to help Charles pack since Lori had broke up with Charles. She was shocked. Kay said she was shocked when this happened, so she went to help. So Rob Wood was up for the state. He asked if Kay or Charles knew where Lori was, and this was when she was gone for those 50 some odd days, and they did not. Kay took JJ to Louisiana with her while Charles traveled for work, and he was there about a week or two. So from February through March, Kay was back and forth to Arizona with JJ to help Charles get squared away. And they got JJ and Charles moved into Houston. And the reason that he moved from Arizona to Texas, by the way, is so that Kay and Larry could help with JJ, because where he was, it was like 150 miles from where Kay and Larry live. So it's kind of a straight shot. And it's a lot closer, obviously, than Phoenix or Maricopa County. So that's why one of the reasons that Charles chose to move back to Texas. Also, when it started becoming clear that JJ was going to have some difficulties and some struggles, there just weren't good schools in the area Kay and Larry live in. And that was another consideration, is that there were really good schools in Arizona that could accommodate JJ as he grew and began going to school. So Kay said she would go stay in Houston with JJ during this time where Lori's gone. If Charles needed to travel, she would go stay for a few days. She said her and JJ had the best time, and Charles did annuities. So in February 2019, when Lori's absent, Kay starts helping Charles with his business. Charles asked her to because he was distraught, and he had a lot to do with payroll and just the business end of a business and then being a dad. Well, Kay and Larry, being business owners, knew how to help him, and so they did. So in return, Kay had access to all of Charles's accounts, his emails, his banks, all that good stuff. So in April of 2019, Lori and Tylee moved to Houston to be with Charles. Kay saw JJ regularly every weekend or every other. Lori stayed in Houston, but was going to Arizona or other places and traveling. She moved from Houston in June 2019. Charles, as we know, got her that home in Chandler, the one he would end up being murdered in. Charles stayed in Houston, and he intended to divorce Lori, as we know earlier, but withdrew that petition. So they ask about Charles, and Kay tells the court that he's dead. He had a life insurance policy, and he talked to Kay about that in February of 2019. Now, when this came up, Lori started writing some notes. Boy, that hand was going fast. Kay said Charles approached her and said he wanted to take Lori off the life insurance policy because Lori didn't want JJ anymore. And Charles also asked her to give half of that to Charles's adult sons, which she has, by the way. We know from the past, Kay has said in interviews that Charles knew she would be the one to end up and raise JJ if something were to happen to him, or that was what he hoped, obviously. Kay last saw JJ in person in Lake Charles, Louisiana on the weekend of May 17th. They gave him a birthday party since his birthday was coming up on May 25th. JJ and Charles spent the weekend before going back to Texas, and that was the last time she ever saw JJ in person. She had contact with JJ when Charles was alive. After Charles's murder, it was 3 times total that she had contact with him from his murder up until JJ would be murdered. So one call, JJ was in a bad mood. He didn't want to talk. It was late. He was tired. Kay said this in the interview I did with them. It upset her that Lori waited until this specific time of the day, knowing he wouldn't be cooperative to call. He didn't want to talk. After Charles's murder, she tried to arrange for JJ to attend Charles's memorial in Louisiana. Initially, Lori agreed through text that JJ could come, and the plan was Kay would fly to Phoenix and get JJ and would have him a week and fly him back to Lori. And that way, Lori didn't have to do anything, but it ended up and didn't happen, as we know. Lori ultimately refused to allow JJ to come to his own father's memorial where her brother murdered him. The conversation with JJ on FaceTime, the last one, was about 35 seconds. He wasn't holding the device. He was looking over his shoulder as if he was being coached. He said, "Hi, Mama. Hi, Papa." That was the last time she saw him ever, was that FaceTime. After Charles's murder, she took his printer and scanner because nobody wanted it. She tried to hook it up and had no luck. So she went to bed, but got up at 4:30 in the morning and something told her to work on that printer. Once she got it working, she saw Charles's Gmail icon on her screen and clicked it. That's when she found this delivery notification for these things Lori bought for the beach wedding. She also saw on the Amazon browsing history the beach wedding dress, linen top and pants, men's top and bottom linens, white, size large, the malachite rings, and maybe some other things like flip-flops. And that address it was delivered to were the townhomes in Rexburg. Now, this is before Tammy was murdered, by the way. So on cross-exam, they asked why she got up to go mess with that scanner. And Kay said it was divine intervention because of what she found. So Mr. Thomas says, "What do you mean by divine intervention?" And Kay said it was in God's hands. And so he didn't touch that. And that was it for Miss Kay. She got off the stand, held high, did an amazing job on behalf of her grandson and Tylee and Tammy. Next up, Brandon Boudreau. This poor man has got trauma, and you can tell it. Who would not? He's very soft-spoken, very emotional, and Lori watches as he comes in, doesn't break contact with him as he's sworn in and up on the stand. He introduces himself. He says he's been married twice. First marriage, he says to Melaniece. They have 4 kids together, and their current ages are 13, 9, 7, and 6. They were married over 10 years. They were married in 2008. They spent time with Melaniece's aunts and uncles, which would be Lori, Summer, Adam, Alex, cousins. They would spend most holidays together, and he actually moved to Arizona and lived with Lori and Charles for a while. I did not know this. I'm not sure if he said this was after the marriage or before. I would assume after, but I did not hear that. Brandon and Lori look at each other as he identifies her. For the record, he said he got to know them very well. Lots of time spent together with both Lori and Charles. As far as Tylee, he knew her from the time she was very little when she came into the family, and Brandon was the one who baptized Tylee when she was 8 years old. He said his kids interacted with them, and his oldest son, he got very emotional as he talked about this. He said his oldest son was close to JJ, and JJ just kind of idolized Brandon and Melaniece's oldest son. And he said JJ wasn't always interactive, but loved their oldest child. JJ also had suitcases everywhere. I guess he would drag out suitcases. I know somebody with autism that does this, and he'll pack for a trip and then he'll unpack. And he said it was sometimes a challenge having JJ over because so many precautions had to be taken, but he said it was always worth it. And his son always made sure JJ was safe when they were not around an adult. Brandon and Charles would hang out when he would bring JJ over to play with Melaniece and Brandon's kids. He said the relationship between Melaniece and Lori was really Melaniece looking more to Lori like a mother figure, and she wanted to be like her. And he said he and Charles got along great. He said that they all saw each other once a month or more. And when Lori and Charles moved, they would see each other regularly because they would travel to make sure they saw each other. The last Christmas everybody celebrated together was 2018, but he said things were different that year. The body language was odd. The conversation didn't flow. And on top of that, Melanie Gibb was there with her family. He had never met her. At this time, he and Melaniece were active in their ward. Now, her activity in church started increasing around this time, maybe a little bit before. He said when they got married, she wasn't a churchgoer. He would be the one to push her to go. And it was that way most of their marriage. But in fall of 2018, she would get passionate, she was getting passionate about different ideas and going more. Now, in the LDS church, they have these firesides, which is like a church run thing where you go, I guess, and learn about different things. Melaniece was going, and it's a special event just focused around their beliefs. But these were not actual firesides. These were not put on by the church. These were like Chad sides, probably. She didn't want Brandon to come because she said that was her thing. And he said it was very clear to him he was not welcome. She would always come home with new ideas of how she could serve the church. And she went to temple every day after a while. And he said, that's extreme. And he said, even if they were on a family trip, such as Disneyland, she would have to go to temple. She focused on the end of the world, and they argued about buying $10,000 in food storage very early on into this. So going into 2019, when all this came apart with Charles and Lori, the church happenings got more bizarre, according to Brandon. In January 2019, they got calls and texts that Lori was cheating and had moved money. These were from Charles. And that essentially put Melaniece in a position where she told Brandon, we are going to take Lori's side. It wasn't really posed like he had a choice. On June 23rd, Brandon got very emotional talking about this, and I totally get it. His grandpa died of a heart attack, and he was told about the date of the funeral a couple of days later. Melanie said that her and the kids would not be going and didn't want anything to do with it, which obviously upset Brandon. He said he took some time, took a walk, and apologized and said he would accept if she didn't go. But later on, down the road, she said God revealed to her that Brandon hacked Lori's computer. At this point, Lori whispers to her defense attorney, Mr. Thomas. He said that argument went on for hours. He said, I don't know how to hack. I don't know anything about Lori's computer. So this is the point where they're visiting family in Utah, and her dad got involved. Remember, Melaniece told Brandon there at her dad's house she wanted a divorce. She went to sleep, and he said he was just overwhelmed. He texted Charles and Lori. He said he was frustrated at them, and Lori didn't text back. He's very emotional, and he said he kept his distance with Charles at Melaniece's request, and they ended up obviously divorcing. So Brandon talked to Charles in the days after Melanie said she wanted to divorce because he thought Charles would be the one to understand that. And we know Charles was going through it. He called him that night and thought Charles would know where he was coming from. And Brandon said he apologized for keeping his distance to Charles. Brandon and Melaniece were selling their house. So he got Melaniece that rental and he got himself one as well. He said Melaniece was standoffish. They agreed that he could tuck his kids in every night. But once she moved into her own place, she wouldn't let him in, saying that she was scared of him. We moved to October 2nd, 2019, when Brandon is shot at. Now, there's an objection. Then we have arguments outside the jury. They're arguing about introducing this, but the state pretty much said this is a common plan or scheme. This attempt on Brandon was part of that, money-wise, whatever. Ultimately, Judge Boyce allowed it in. And he did say that in the future, they're going to have to fill in some gaps with this. So October 2nd, the day Brandon was shot at, woke up, got the kids ready for school, dropped his two oldest off at elementary school, dropped the third child at daycare, and then the baby with Melaniece. He went to the gym, headed home, and he had only been in this house just a few days, by the way. The only people that knew were neighbors who helped him move from his prior residence and Melaniece. So when he turns down the street, he came around the corner and saw the Jeep in front of his driveway. And he said it was almost touching the van that was already parked there. If you go back to that crash course of the Connecting the Dots series, the eyewitnesses said it was nose to nose, very close to that white van. He said also there was a Texas license plate, and he noticed the spare tire was gone. The window was kind of propped open, but then it came up and he saw a silencer, or what he thought was a silencer, and heard a bang. His driver's side window shattered, so he hit the gas and went forward. He called 911 and stopped next to the community pool. That's when he saw the Jeep come around the corner, and he followed it, but the dispatch was like, not a good idea. So he went back and parked in front of his house and waited on police. So Brandon met with detectives and realized Tylee had a Jeep that Charles bought her, and Charles had actually given Brandon the VIN number. So he gave that VIN number to detectives. And Brandon was in insurance, and he didn't insure this vehicle specifically, but I'm not sure if maybe he was trying to get a quote for them or what the ballpark insurance would be or what. But for some reason, Charles gave Brandon that VIN number. Brandon also called Adam and Zach Cox because they were worried about things too. He looked up some things online about the attempted shooting, and he knew who did it. And he got worried, thinking back to previous things that happened, and reread emails that Charles had sent him. The people Charles named in his emails were the ones attending those fireside meetings that were not officially fireside, the Chad side meetings or whatever, Lori side. There were emails from Chad Daybell Charles had sent to Brandon as well. And he Googled Chad. That's when he sees, wow, Tammy Daybell has died. So Brandon tells law enforcement. Then he learns JJ and Tylee are missing as this progressed. Once he realized Alex shot at him, he realized nobody's seen JJ or Tylee in a while. So they show Tylee's birth certificate to Lori. She looks at it, no emotion, verifies that's it. They have Brandon read the birth certificate for Tylee with a date of birth of September 24th, 2002. And another exhibit that was going to be shown, or that was shown, is a big photo of Tylee. It was an 8x10, just copy paper, her beautiful face covering that whole paper. There was an objection. The reason they objected, we can't tell this is Photoshop. Do you know who took it? That kind of thing. He heard Tylee and JJ had been found while he was at his parents' home, and Brandon started crying on the stand. Brandon had a wedding planned, and it was the next day after they found the kids' bodies. This was planned in advance. So he got married. Then he came to Rexburg and identified JJ's body for Kay and Larry. They took him somewhere, showed him photos of the body. Brandon is crying, recalling this. It's going to be a trauma that he will see the rest of his life, I'm sure. The whole time, this beautiful picture of Tylee is on the screen as Brandon finishes up his direct exam. Mr. Thomas is up for the defense to cross, and he says October 2nd, he was shot at. And what did you Google search? Brandon said Chad Daybell to figure out who he was. Mr. Thomas said, you and Melaniece had issues back at the end of 2018. And Brandon said nothing that was causing them to even visit the idea of a divorce. That didn't come until around June of 2019. He talks about taking their children to her parents when he was confronted with their vision about Brandon. You remember the meter that went from 0 to G, and it was a revelation that Brandon was gay. And then Mr. Thomas says, this has nothing to do with your friend posting a video at the Pink Pony in Gulf Shores, Alabama, dancing with someone. And Brandon's like, no, it was a work trip, and it was a public video. Brandon was, by the way, he asked how far away the Jeep was from him when he got shot at. He said 20 to 30 feet. He used the analogy of kind of where you are and where I am is about that distance. And that was the estimate. So then Mr. Thomas asked, has this have been a stray bullet that hit your car? And Brandon's like, no. He saw a silencer. Did you see a muzzle flash? No. So Mr. Thomas, is it possible the shot came from somewhere else? And Brandon's like, no. Brandon was not the insurance agent, but like I said, he ran the VIN number that was brought up on cross. He's asked if he turned emails from Charles over to authorities, and they were to the family with concerns of what was going on with Lori and Charles was recounting their breakup. Someone also included evidence of who she was meeting up with, which would be Chad. Thomas asked who gave him the family emails from Charles, and Brandon said, I was family, and I was included on those group emails from Charles. So when he found out they had found the remains, June 9th was when they found the remains. June 10th was his wedding. So he went ahead with his wedding, and then he came to Rexburg. Law enforcement asked him to identify JJ. Mr. Thomas asked, why ask you? Why didn't they ask a close family member? And Brandon said, I was family to JJ. That kind of ended it. He did great on the stand. The jurors were engrossed in Kay and Brandon's testimony, just absolutely several taking notes. This jury, unlike Murdoch, can take notes. I didn't see any eyes wandering around. They were all focused. So let's hope this jury listens to this evidence and here's what happened over the course of, you think about it, January to October 19th. All this, the separation out of the blue. You've got Charles being murdered. You've got JJ and Tylee being murdered. You've got Brandon being shot at. And you've got Tammy Daybell murdered. You've got an exhumation of Tammy Daybell's body, and Alex Cox drops over dead. Look in the span of that almost year at all the chaos and the mayhem and the murders, and just how do people live like that? As far as Lori, I just didn't see anything that was overly emotional from her. Of course, I couldn't see the front of her face, but I just didn't see anything. And I was not in there when the crime scene photos were put on the screen. There was, I don't know if she looked at them or what, but she did look at the screen at the pictures that were shown of Tylee and the birth certificate. So I'm back in the main courtroom tomorrow. I do have a seat. So I will be tweeting live from inside the courtroom. You can follow me on Twitter, Pretty Lies Alibi. If you don't have Twitter or Facebook, I have put a feed up on my website, prettyliesandalibis.org. Go to the Twitter feed. I have found it is impossible for me to do Twitter and Facebook at the same time. So I'm tweeting for the podcast and Law and Crime Network. So if you don't have Twitter, go to the website. You can see it there. All right, tomorrow, Detective Hermosillo is up first. He will be a very lengthy witness. This is going to be probably about that welfare check up to maybe when they found the kids' bodies. He testified a very long time at Chad's preliminary hearing about finding the bodies, but I will bring it all to you from inside that courtroom. Hope you guys have a good night. Remember tonight, Dan Abrams Live and Banfield. I'll be on both. We're going to talk about what happened today, and we will see you tomorrow, guys.